Chapter 14. The lab was too quiet for a Thursday morning, a time when his colleagues were usually drifting in and out with their teas and coffees. Someone was always arguing softly over a screen, someone else flipping through notes on an iPad. Today there was none of it. Alexander liked it that way. The absence of people made room for truths he could not admit elsewhere. Lumiere glowed faintly at the center of the room, restrained within its containment field. It was waiting, it always waited. He had designed it that way, a system capable of learning restraint, of holding itself back unless called upon. He stood with his hands braced against the edge of the workstation, eyes fixed on the projections. Each layer of Lumiere was a decision he had once made with confidence and was now revisiting with dread. Letting Lumiere go, as they so delicately phrased it, was not a switch he could flip. It was a slow dismantling of ownership, of authorship. It felt like a controlled release of something that had never been meant to belong to anyone else. He ran a simulation. What Lumiere would become if it were no longer bound solely to his parameters. The results populated the air in branching paths, each one diverging into consequences he could not fully trace. Some ended in stability, others didn't. He terminated the run. The memory of cars came back to him, different models, different colors, never the same vehicle twice, but always the same patience. The way they were parked far enough to be deniable, long enough to be unmistakable. He had told himself it was coincidence, then paranoia, then stress. Now he was convinced it meant something he dared not to think about. He knew Kazakh intelligence didn't announce itself with force or spectacle, because it didn't need to. Their method was calculated and precise. You were meant to notice them slowly, in fragments that could still be dismissed as coincidence if you tried hard enough. By the time certainty settled in your chest, it was already useless. The moment you understood you were being watched was the moment the watching had been happening for far longer than you could trace. It came together for Alexander not as a revelation, but as an accumulation. Sarah had been the first visible crack, the human face of something vast and organized, but she was only the surface layer. Beneath her were patterns he couldn't ignore anymore. The delayed badge access at work that no one could quite explain, the subtle tightening in his department head's tone, questions that were timed but too precisely to be innocent. This wasn't one desperate player reaching for Lumiere, it was a state apparatus adjusting its grip, eventually closing the distance. And once he recognized that the pressure surrounding him no longer felt chaotic, he knew it was organized. As if summoned by the thought, his phone chimed. A message blinked into view. Dr. Moreau requests your presence in the conference room. Alexander stared at it for a long moment, then shut down Lumiere's interface and initiated lockdown protocols. The system dimmed obediently, folding itself back into restraint. He hesitated before disengaging his personal credentials, then left them active. The walk to the conference room felt longer than usual. The building's corridors were immaculate, white and reflective, designed to feel neutral. Tonight they felt exposed. He was aware of cameras on the way, acting as not some passive observers but instruments with purpose. Dr. Moreau was not alone. That was the first thing Alexander noticed. There was a woman standing beside him around the conference table who neither smiled nor expressed anything. She was mid-30s, maybe older, dressed plainly with a dark blazer, no visible insignia, hair pulled back tightly in a bun. She held a tablet loosely at her side, posture relaxed and eyes alert. She was calm like the room already belonged to her. Doctor. Moreau gestured politely towards the chair nearest the door, then turned as the woman stepped away behind them. Alexander, Moreau said, voice measured and professional. Thank you for coming on such short notice. The woman extended her hand with a firm grip before Moreau could continue. Claire Donovan, she said, I work with U.S. Counterintelligence. She didn't specify a department. Alexander shook her hand, registering the practiced calm in her expression, neutral and utterly unreadable. This was not someone used to explaining herself. Moreau cleared his throat. Agent Donovan reached out earlier this week. Her request involved your work and your safety. That word landed heavier than it should have. They sat. Moreau remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid in a way Alexander hadn't seen before. His eyes avoided Claire's entirely, fixed instead on a point just above the far wall, as though the room itself required monitoring. "I've shared everything I'm authorized to share," Moreau said finally. "Beyond that, this conversation is not mine to participate in." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Alexander, I trust your judgment." And with that he left, the door closed with a soft, airtight seal. Claire waited a beat longer than necessary, letting the silence stretch and the absence of witnesses settle into Alexandra's bones. "I'll keep this direct," she said at last. "Because you don't have the luxury of confusion anymore." Alexander leaned back slightly. "Then start with why I'm here." She nodded as if he had answered correctly. "You've noticed you're being watched," she said, "but never close enough to provoke confrontation." Alexander didn't react, he didn't deny it either. "You've also experienced disruptions at work," she continued. She slid a slim folder across the table but didn't open it. "And recently," she said, "you were approached by a woman named Sarah." That was the moment his composure fractured, not outwardly but internally, like ice shifting beneath pressure. Claire watched him carefully now. "She presented herself as a facilitator," Claire went on. "A messenger who acted on behalf of a man named Rees Remen or someone higher up the chain. She offered you leverage. Protection or wait, maybe something personal in return." Alexandra's jaw tightened. "You met her in Hunter's Point," Claire said. "An isolated location, chosen for its access restrictions and limited civilian traffic." She tapped the folder. This time she opened it. Some photos slid into view, with Alexander exiting his apartment building at dusk and him seated across from Sarah, her face partially shadowed, his own unmistakable. "Evidence." "She won't deliver what she promised you," Claire said flatly, "not because she doesn't want to, but because she can't." Alexander finally spoke. "You're very confident." Claire met his gaze. "Because we've been tracking her network for over 2 years. She's a recruiter, not a rescuer." She closed the folder. "And Lumiere," she said, voice lowering, "is exactly what they've been waiting for." The name in her mouth felt like a violation. Alexander stood. "So, what is it you want?" Claire didn't rise. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering how honest to be. "We want her," she said, "and the people behind her. We want the entire ring exposed." "And me?" he asked. "You," Claire said, "are already in play. What we're offering is direction." She paused. "And help." Alexander let out a hollow laugh. "You mean cooperation?" "I mean survival," she replied, "for you and for your son." That word son hit harder than any threat. Claire's expression softened just enough to suggest calculation rather than empathy. "We can help you recover custody," she said, "legally though. Using channels Sarah doesn't have access to." Alexander looked away, pulse roaring in his ears. "And Lumiere?" he asked. Claire didn't flinch. "You give us limited access," she said, "enough to understand its architecture, enough to use it as bait. And afterward, there is no afterward," Claire said calmly. "There is only containment." Alexander realized then that nothing had changed, only the language. He was still being asked to surrender his life's work, still being promised his child in return, still being maneuvered by forces far larger than him. The only difference was the flag. "I don't trust you," he said finally. Claire bowed once. "I wouldn't expect you to." She stood, smoothing her jacket, "but trust isn't required." "Time is." She moved towards the door, then paused. "Sarah believes she's in control," Claire added. "So do the people watching your house. Let them keep believing that for now." The door opened. "We'll be in touch," she said, "whether you're ready or not." And then she was gone, leaving Alexander alone with the certainty that Lumiere no longer belonged to him, and neither, perhaps, did his choices. Alexander remained seated long after she left, staring at the empty space where Claire had stood. He understood now why the questions had started, why the atmosphere had changed, why Lumiere had stopped being just his creation and become a liability. Everyone wanted it. Everyone wanted him. And once again, he was standing at the center of a game he had never agreed to play, deciding not who to trust but who would betray him last.